Good morning, everyone. I'm very happy today that we have a very important speaker for the course. And her name is Kristy Salmon. She is the Vice President for British Petroleum and for Advanced Bio and Physical Sciences for Low Carbon Energy. And I've known Kristy for quite a while. She was one of the best mentors I've had for my graduate studies, and I'm very happy to have her here, providing us with a really interesting view on the sustainability approach of such a big company, which everybody know is one of the powerhouse for providing powers for a lot of people here. So just briefly about Kristy. Kristy has a PhD in microbiology and immunology from McGill University in Canada. She completed postdoctoral work at University of California at Los Angeles and held the faculty position at UC Irvine, where she ran the computational biology research lab focused on research on the cusp of academia and industry. So she's very in ease with industrial projects, and also she actually moves very seamlessly from academia to industry and became a director of the renewable fuels at a startup company. And then in 2011, she joined BP as the head of research for biofuels. And 2015, she became director of the new Bioscience Center in San Diego. And 2018, she further led a study about circular economy, what it means to BP, and really lead a specific aim that BP has on how to make BP sustainable in the various aspects, or particularly for this energy part. So she is responsible for a new team that focuses on sustainable early stage, low carbon technology development and fundamental science research for the company. So I think it is my pleasure. I haven't connected with her for a long time. And then I saw her speaking at the Society of Women Engineers as one of the panel. And that was how we sort of like reconnected again. And then when I found out that she is doing a lot of low carbon research and applications, and since we are actually setting up this new course on sustainability, there is no better person from the industry with such diverse experiences from academia and then translations and all. So I really would like to welcome Kristy Salmon to our course here. And I would like to highly encourage you to ask questions. She loves questions, and beyond the science, also as a scientist, as a leader in such a big company. So without further ado, Kristy, welcome to NTU, to APRU seminar course. Really good to see you, and take it away.
Thanks, Sharon. Thanks for inviting me. Listen, first, thanks for having me. So my background is quite interesting. So just for all of you, I'm going to go through. I thought what might be interesting for all of you is to sort of talk about. We talk about sustainability, and I am a biologist at heart, and I do work in a massive company called BP. But I do work on it with a team on low carbon sustainable technology development. And if you guys got a chance to actually look at all at BP and our sustainability frame, I wrote AIM 19, which is the aim around embracing circularity. So I really am bought into all this. I preach it constantly in BP. But what I thought would be interesting for you guys as students was just think about, how do you take a massive company like BP and change it, and make them embrace sustainability? And I'm really, really, really pleased to say, like, this company has changed dramatically over the past just 2 years, right? So I'm going to set the stage for this. So we had a CEO named Bob Dudley. And so he was the CEO of what we called BP as an international oil company, an IOC. And I'm going to talk a little bit about this journey that BP's been on, which has moved from a new CEO, his name is Bernard Looney, and how he has embraced not only us changing as a company into a net zero company, but also how we've started to embrace sustainability at the heart of everything we do now. And that's sort of how I thought I'd walk you through, because as you think about sustainability, there's the aspects of the sustainability itself, but it's also the act of how do we get big companies and little companies to embrace this and move towards this. It's complicated, right? So let's see, let's go to the next slide. So I'm giving you the take-home message first up front, right? So how do you do this? So what I tell you is it is a journey, and I show these light switches for a reason, because this is how I talk to people in BP, the executives, the senior executives, right? It's a light switch, right? They all turn light switches on and off. And I tell people it's not a typical light switch. It's more like a dimmer switch. I don't know if you've seen these. So you can actually increase the light and make it brighter or not as bright. And the question is, how bright do you want to go? And it's a journey to go as bright as we can be as a company in BP. It does require a bit of trial and error, right? You're not going to get it all right all the time. And in fact, in our journey on circularity, so circular economy thinking, a lot of the feedback we had from other companies was, don't be afraid to start small, because if you try to start too big and you mess up, you may never get another chance. That's what happens in a big company. So it does require trial and error, and you have to be able to have a company that's willing to do that. You also can't do this alone, right? You do have to work with others, because sustainability is a big web, and you do have to work with everybody. Communication's key. So you do have to not only communicate externally, and you guys, I think, are talking about ESG a lot in this course. It's also about communicating to your own employees. Your employees have to be bought in on this. So communication is massively key on every direction you can possibly think of. And yes, the last thing is involve your employees. In fact, what I found in the work on circularity was that the employees had a lot of great ideas. And I work in sustainable technology development, and there's lots of great ideas within our company. So communicating, involving them, that's a key for a corporation the size of BP. And I think it's a probably key for a corporation or a company of any size. So that's my big take homes if you want to get there on this. So I actually thought I'd step back, because I don't know how much you guys understand, a typical international, integrated oil company. Like these are massive companies, and the way they're typically set up. So if you think about Shell, Exxon, Total, all of these companies, this is how they're typically set up. You have an upstream, and that's what you guys probably think about for an oil company. They go out and find the oil and gas, right? So these are those rigs in the ocean, sometimes on land, and they go get it, right? Then some companies have what they call a midstream. So this would be your refineries. This is where they take the oil and gas and they actually produce things like petrol, lubricants, things like that. And then the downstream actually sells it. In BP, we didn't have a midstream. We had just an upstream and a downstream. What BP had was that extra segment, as we called them, these are segments, we called alternative energy. And this is what housed biofuels, wind, and solar. So that's just give you an idea of what an IOC typically looks like. So that has all changed. The other thing for BP, just to understand, is we're not only, before, let's talk 2019, an IOC, but we are also a huge trading company. So I'm just giving you the scope of the size of BP. So we have 12,000 customers, right? We operate in 140 countries. We move 240 million tons of products every year. And we trade 4 billion barrels of crude annually. We're not talking a small company. And on the bottom, you can see this again is 2019. So we were selling things like crude and products, natural gas, liquid natural gas, biofuels. So we have mills in Brazil that make bioethanol, chemicals, currency we trade, power, carbon, financials, you name it. Massive company. How do you take all that, right, and start thinking about sustainability and how to change? So in 2020, we announced a new CEO, Bernard Looney, and he also announced, not sure you guys keep up with BP, but we're no longer an IOC. We're calling ourselves an IEC, which is an integrated energy company. So we're no longer going to be an oil and gas company per se. We're going to supply energy to the world. And what that did is it led us to a new purpose. And so I'm just setting the stage for our sustainability journey, which was about reimagining energy for people and for planet. Well, that right there says that we're going to embrace sustainability, because all of a sudden we're going to care about people and planet, right? It's not just about bottom lines. It's not just about shareholders. It's about everything else. Bernard Looney is an amazing CEO. He wears his heart in his sleeve, and that helped drive this. So as you think about having companies switch over, it comes from the top, but it has to find its way all the way through the organization. So from that, our purpose, had to drive our ambition, and our ambition became to become a net zero company by 2050 or sooner. And we went beyond just ourselves and said, we want to help the world get to net zero. So again, if you sit back and think about that from a sustainability, perspective, that says we have to embrace sustainability. So the BP strategy, in a way, is pretty simple. And how does this work overall? We have what we call 3 pillars for BP. We talk about low carbon electricity and energy, which I think you can all sort of think about that is sustainable, that is long term. So that sort of sits in our sustainability thinking. Convenience and mobility, I just told you we have a lot of retail sites. We sell a lot of products. That's another pillar, and how we're going to make money for our shareholders. And finally, the resilient and focused hydrocarbons. This is about oil and gas, because the reality is we are not turning off the taps. Nobody can. I talk to a lot of people about we have to turn it all off and switch everything to renewables. We don't have enough infrastructure. We don't have that in place. The cost would be too high. And by the way, if I turned it off tomorrow, you could basically do nothing. You wouldn't heat your house. You wouldn't cool your house. You wouldn't have a fridge. You wouldn't be able to cook. You couldn't drive a bicycle because bicycles are made from oil and gas. So you have to think about the complexity of this. How do we do it better, right? How do we do it to get where we need to be as a planet, right? So I just want to set the stage of BP and how we started off in the early 2020. I'm going to get to the blue box in a second, but I just thought we'd start there. So as we thought about how BP gets to net zero, they came up with the 10 aims. So again, driving your goals requires aims, ambitions, etc. This is how we initially just looked at how BP was going to do their purpose and ambition, which was 10 aims. We said 5, it's shown here in green, was about becoming a net zero company. So net zero in our operations, net zero in our oil and gas, net zero in the intensity of the products we sell. The other blue ones were about how we were going to help the world get to net zero. So it's not just about us. And the cool one I will talk about at the end is aim 10, which is around clean cities. So how do we partner with other cities, other regions now as well, about how to help them get to net zero? And that all fits within the sustainability idea, right? So I did send you guys the link. Hopefully, Dr. Lim sent it out. But there is this link that I have given her. It's a really cute little video. It's drawn as you talk. I love these energy illustrated, we call them. It talks about the first 3 of BP's aims. If you're interested to see how we think about this, and that does align with scope 1, scope 2, scope 3 emissions, if you've heard of those things, this is how BP defines it and how we're going to measure ourselves, which again becomes important for sustainability. How do you measure whether or not you're making improvements in your sustainability goal? So that's really about the net zero aspect of everything. The one thing I did want to draw you guys to, because as we talk about sustainability and net zero, because I think they go hand in hand, it is about carbon emissions in some respect. And I just want to draw, there are 2 terms that are used a lot by companies. One is absolute target, and the other is intensity target. They are not the same thing. And as you guys go through this course, I don't know if you'll talk about LCAs, so life cycle analysis. It's really important when you look at comparing 2 processes or 2 products and who's better from a sustainability standpoint on carbon and stuff like that. Apples to apples comparison is critical. Apples to pears don't work. You have to keep things on the same line. So absolute targets, which is how BP thinks about it, is the target that aims to reduce greenhouse gas emissions by a set amount. So we're going to reduce by a set amount. So the reduction is actually in the total amount of emissions. So if you start off with 500 megatons and you want to get to 0, then you've got to get rid of 500 megatons. And really, if you think about it, that's what's needed to get to net zero. It's the only way we're going to tackle climate change. Other companies talk about intensity targets. So this is a normalized metric, right, that sets a company's emissions targets relative to something else, maybe GDP or their own profits or whatever. And that could be something that fluctuates. So you're not actually getting rid of those 500 megatons. You're maybe getting rid of 10% of that because your GDP went down or whatever went down. So just make sure that you understand when you look at the companies you're studying, that you're studying absolutes, because that's really the only way to think about bringing down the numbers. The other way is just interesting from other perspectives, and if you're an economics major, it could be quite interesting, but just to keep in perspective what this really means. So for us, this is how we look at it as BP, right? So we're trying to get net zero in our own operations. So as we operate our facilities, our refineries, our ships, our labs, our everything, that needs to get to net zero by 2050 or sooner. Everything we make, all that oil and gas we produce, any energy we produce has got to be net zero. And so that's another target. And then finally, because we don't just sell products from our own oil and gas, we sell products, we buy in oil and gas from other companies like Exxon and Shell and Total on that. And when we make products from those and sell them, we initially said we would get the 50% intensity reduction on the emissions from those. So this does fit in the world of sustainability, but it is more on the side of what I'll call net zero than sustainability. So to bring us back to sustainability at the heart, this is where the blue box is going to come in. So what we've done is we have a new executive vice president named Julia Churchia. And so this is her box. She is the EVP of strategy and sustainability. And the blue box says, this is our frame that's going to link, and I'm going to go through the frame to see how we set ourselves up. And it wasn't easy about how we're going to embrace sustainability because of what we do, to get ourselves to the right spot for the planet and for people. So that's the blue box, right? So that's our sustainability. So really, it comes down to the fact that, we do believe that the world is on an unsustainable path, right? We cannot keep this up. There's just some facts here that are on your slides. We have to change, right? So the talk that Siren saw me give at SWE in Indianapolis, I titled the talk, which was, "We don't want to live in a WALL-E world." So WALL-E was this little character, right, from a Pixar movie from 2010, which was, we don't live on Earth anymore. We've damaged it so much that we now live on spaceships. We're like blimpy people who drink milkshakes all the time. And we can't live on the planet because we've destroyed it, basically. There's no more photosynthesis, right? Because the sun can't penetrate the layers of grime that we've created. And WALL-E is a little robot who's trying to clean the Earth. It's cute. If you haven't seen it, it's really worth watching. But again, it's from 2010, right? But I tell people what drives me is I don't want to live in a WALL-E world. So that's the name of the talk, Siren, if you didn't know. That's what drives me. And I do actually have a WALL-E on my desk at work and one on my backpack. So I am driven by this. So we have to think about it. And sustainability means a lot of things. And just some of the aspects are on here. So just think about it, right? 2.6 gigatons, right, of expected fall in 2020 emissions due to COVID-19. That was, as impactful as COVID's been on health, it was actually quite impactful on climate because we didn't fly, we didn't travel, we didn't do stuff. But that's all coming back up, right? Now that we're all back, a lot of us are back to work again. 1 in 7 people still lack access to modern electricity. So there's lots of people not even on the grid. And if they want to get on the grid, how do we bring them back on sustainably, right? These are questions we ask in BP. We work, again, in 140 countries. And there are countries like that want to get, up, with more power, more energy. How do you help them do that the right way this time? And then down here, 1 million species threatened with extinction. That's been a big wake-up call because a lot of things of what we do are destroying environments, right? But the good news is there is a collective need to ask, right? So there's been, so this data is from 2019, 2020. So there's maybe more now. So I'm just setting the stage of, I can only use slides that are approved. so just to set the stage, right? So in 2019, 2020, it was Net zero targets have been set by EU, the European Union, plus 19 other countries. That's impressive, right? 114 cities in the world at that point were committed to 1.5 degrees from the Paris Accord, and trying to align their climate action plans. Whether or not they're actually really making inroads is an interesting question, but the point is they've made some commitments, right? So you've got, on the good front, right, 24 million jobs were created by delivery of the Paris goals and sustainable practice, and that's growing. In fact, the circular economy, just that one aspect of sustainability, is believed to be trillions of dollars worth of worth. So just think about what's available and what kind of economic progress cities, countries, et cetera, could make just by embracing circularity and embracing sustainability. And of course, ESG is becoming more important with shareholders and with investment communities, et cetera. So these are just some things to think about why we have to do this. So this brings me to BP's sustainability frame. And this is, again, how a massive corporation like BP that's got, think about the upstream kind of idea. We search for oil and gas, we then process it. We have wind farms, we have biofuels, we had chemicals, we no longer have chemicals. But I mean, how do you pull all that and think about sustainability? And this is what we came up with. And this took time, right? So I'm going to go through all of this piece by piece, but just to give you that idea of this. Now, I do have the SDGs on here, the UN Sustainability Development Goals, right? So while we link to these and we think that we offer something towards, being able to attain the goals between, the aims for these goals, we do think that these are governmental things. They're goals set out for governments, but corporations like mine, companies all over the world should be supporting how we get there, because that's the way it's going to work. So there are three aspects to BP's sustainability frame. So they're pictured here in the middle. So obviously we've already talked about get to net zero, because we've got to get to net zero. The second one is care for our planet. And then there's improve people's lives. And running around the outside here is sort of the way we looked at it. So one, there was in the green here, the three focus areas shown in the middle. We have aims and objectives against each one of these, and some are in more development than others because we're 2 years into this. And we also said we were going to be transparent as part of this, but it has to align to our strategy. So I showed you the three pillars of our strategy, and that's where we have to align. And that's how corporations work. It all has to be driven by the company strategy. We also said we want to embed it in our DNA. So I work in BP, and one of the interesting things when I first joined the company was they have this policy of when you take a staircase, you must hold the handrail, right? So if you get caught on a stairwell not holding a handrail, people will call you out, and you'll basically have a lecture about the safety of holding a handrail. And we joke, but it's true. It's embedded in my DNA now. I even hold the handrail at home. We go out to a mall or something, we hold the handrail because you know what? It's safer. And BP has a big safety policy, and that's great, but it's embedded in our DNA. So we're saying, the biologist in me is so happy about this comment, right? We want to embed sustainability into the DNA of BP and the corporation as a whole, so that we always think about not just, am I going to make money, but is this checking sustainability and our aims around that as well. And finally, it is also around external collaboration. What did I say in the beginning? You don't do this alone. Nobody's going to do sustainability on their own. So it is about partnerships to drive progress and shape that future together. So that is key to how we think about sustainability in the company. So again, we're going to go through these a little bit to give you some feeling of how this works. So first of all, again, we've talked about net zero. This is about becoming a net zero company by 2050 or sooner, right? And help the world get there. So really it was just those two aims, and that's where we started. So how are we going to do that? We didn't start from zero on all of this, but just to give you an idea, we do work on low carbon fuels, right? So we look on low carbon fuels and power supply. For example, BP's ultimate fuel technology is about cleaner engines, and cleaner engines burn cleaner fuel, and you don't have as many emissions, as much nit and grit, NOx and SOx and all that other stuff that comes out of cars. And ultimately, then it's lowering emissions across the board, get better gas mileage as well, so you use less fuel. So that's one area we do. We're also into electrification. So BP strongly believes that by 2040, we're going to have a lot more EVs, electric vehicles on the road. So we've invested in electric vehicle charging. So in the UK, it was called ChargeMaster, it's now called Pulse. And we've also bought a company in the US now called Amply. And we're aiming to have 70,000 electric vehicle charging stations across the world. That will also aid to sustainability. Hydrogen and carbon capture storage. My teams work on these areas. Green hydrogen, so splitting water into oxygen and hydrogen, trapping that hydrogen, using it for power subsequently. And how do we capture carbon, so carbon dioxide mainly, and store it? Because we need to pull CO2 from the atmosphere because there's too much in the atmosphere. We need to put it back underground. And so my team also works in this kind of area. BP's made a huge commitment, and we are going to build the UK's largest CCS up in the Teesside area of the UK. And that's the first of its kind, right? So these are huge and game changing. And that last one on there, methane emissions. So a lot of companies flare at their refineries, excess methane. That's bad. Methane is one of the more toxic greenhouse gases for our atmosphere, right? It's much, much worse, 4 times worse than carbon dioxide. And so being able to detect methane emissions and being able to tackle those, we've put a huge amount of investment in this in drone technology and being able to find it. And that's one of our commitments. And again, that's around sustainability and getting to net zero. So just to give you an idea also, BP is investing in companies that do this. So we don't have to do it all ourselves. That's that partnership. So there is a little company called Onyx, and it actually came from some BP employees who spun out their own little company to improve wind analytics, and now being implemented at some of our wind farms. So just this little tiny startup company, for example, has actually improved wind capacity by 225 gigawatts per year already. And that's only going to improve. And that actually just in itself has reduced the amount of CO2 by 100,000 tons per year. So it's only going to get better. And if you put that kind of technology onto other wind farms, not just our own, imagine the savings there as well. So these are all just little things that BP has done and continues to do. And of course, sustainable fuels production. So my team works in this area. So we've had this goal of 11 million gallons per annum. This is biojet. So the aviation industry is one of those industries that's going to be very hard to decarbonize. Jet fuel, complicated, it packs a lot of power. Putting hydrogen planes in the air, I don't want to be on a hydrogen plane personally. But so for example, one of the things my company's done, and it's shown here with this Fulcrum and waste to fuels, is we've invested in this company, Fulcrum, and what they're doing is they're taking municipal solid waste, rubbish, whatever you want to call it. Instead of going to landfill, it now goes to a gasifier. It gets gasified to syngas. So syngas is carbon monoxide, so CO, plus hydrogen. And then my team has developed a catalyst that does a technology called Fischer-Tropsch. So it's an old technology, but we've got a great catalyst and partnered with another company called Johnson Matthey to pull that together and take the syngas and rebuild the chains. So eventually you make biojet. So you're making a renewable jet fuel from rubbish that would have gone to landfill, which would have eventually emitted methane gas to the atmosphere. So we've avoided that. And yes, we're going to combust the jet fuel at the end, but it is much more friendlier than what was there before. And so this is huge, right? So this not just makes jet fuel, it also makes things like renewable lubricants as well. So many things come off of this technology. So, happy to discuss this if people have questions about this, but this is first of its kind. That plant, which the first plant is outside of Reno, Nevada, so not quite Vegas, but close enough. And first of its kind, and it's going through commissioning now. So it's pretty exciting stuff. Then, of course, carbon offsetting. So you're going to have to offset the hydrocarbons that you pull from the ground still, because we will still continue to do that. And so we've got a group called Finite Carbon that we've invested in and kind of built up with BP. And this has diverted 50 million tons of carbon emissions by investing in forestry. So planting trees, because trees honestly are a great way to sequester carbon dioxide. So it's great. So we've invested in 21 states, and several $100 million has flown into these forests to plant trees and therefore sequester more and more carbon. And that continues. Every company who's going to do sustainability has got to set aims. You have to have targets because everything should be driven by the targets. And if you have targets, everybody's paycheck, their bonus at the end of the year is all tied to whether or not you make these targets. So it's a really great way to force a corporation to deliver on what they say they're going to deliver and not just, greenwash, we call it, right? Just talking. So these are the original aims that we had. So we said, by the way, these are changed. So at the end of the deck, you'll see we're already 2 years in and we've upped the ante for what we're going to deliver. So this is where we set out on emission reduction, our low carbon spending. We wanted to see it way more than the $5 billion, but we're going to get there and we're making commitments now in this space. So just all I want you to get from this slide is every company that says they're talking sustainability, what is their aim? How are they planning to get there? How are they holding themselves accountable towards this? How do they measure it? And sometimes measuring sustainability is harder than anything else. So just to give you that idea. So let's move along the sustainability frame. So the next one is improving people's lives. So we said this was going to support a just energy transition. It's not just for the wealthy countries, it has to be for the world. And we're also promoting well-being, and that includes mental health for our workforce, as well as the communities where we work. So we work in some communities where we're the biggest employer, right? And so we have a duty to those communities as well. So the three major aims in this space are below. So provide more clean energy for more people, respect human rights, promote equality and sustainable livelihoods, and also promote well-being with a focus on mental and physical health. Right? I think we've all been surviving through COVID. Mental health has become more and more important to everything we're doing. And at BP, I'll be honest with you, there's a lot of talk about mental health, a lot of support for mental health, and getting people to talk about it. And I think it's been a huge change for our employees and how people are able to work well, even when we're working at home and not with others. It's been complicated, right? So it's important, right? And so that's one of the commitments BP made. So just to give you a touch on a couple of these, right? I just thought I'd touch on this one to give an idea. This is not my specialty, but if you're interested in the people side of sustainability, we have a whole group that is tasked with this. So we have the whole thing for us was clear commitments, right? Global scope and reach. This is not just again about the UK and the US. This is global, and you have to have a systematic application to this. So below, like on clear commitments, we're going to have clear commitments on worker rights. We're going to have clear commitments on vulnerable groups and individuals, freedom of expression, water and sanitation, land rights, and grievance mechanisms. So we're making a commitment to these areas, and we're going to hold ourselves accountable and be judged from external groups how well we do in these areas and where we need to improve. So just, that's one area where we have committed. And so again, as you look at other companies and you look at their case studies, how are they saying what they're going to do in these spaces, and how are they going to measure and be measured by external parties, not just themselves? The global scope of reach for us was about all the employees. Again, not just the ones in the big company, in the big countries. We've got Trinidad and Tobago, and we've got Ghana, and we've got all sorts of countries that we need to think about all of those communities. The communities where they operate as well. So, where we've got operations, we need to think about that. And one of the great examples I can give you guys is Brazil. So when I first joined BP back in 2011, we owned and operated 3 sugarcane mills in Brazil, and they were making sugar, ethanol for cars, and power, right? And we were going to double the size of one of our mills. And to do that, they're in the middle of nowhere. You fly into a city and then you drive for hours and then you go down these dirt roads and all of a sudden you're at the mill. There's nothing there. There's no infrastructure. There's nothing. We had to basically build small cities to house the families of the employees that were building these mills, right? doubling the size of these mills. That was our commitment to them. Schools, pharmacy, all that had to be developed because we owed it to our community to help them, right? And then we stayed. We left the infrastructure there because the workers that work at the mill could then use those facilities to the future. And it's amazing how much that makes a difference to the productivity and the want. Like, the good news is that people in Brazil like to work for BP because, one, we care that they go home the way they came to work, and two, we're committed to the community to know that they're going to have just lives, right? It's all going to work. So yeah, that's the other thing. And then systematic application, right, is around labor rights, slavery, modern slavery, being very careful of who we work with, how we work with them, how we judge our partners, etc. And that's all commitments we made in the people space. Care for our planet, which is much more, I know much more about. This is about making a positive difference to the environment in which we operate. So again, from a sustainability plan, we said, look, we're going to do better when we get there, and when we put our operations in, than not. And we would have never done that. BP never would have thought about that pre-2020. So this was about promoting cleaner environments, enhancing biodiversity, which is huge, and promoting natural climate solutions. Use resources responsibly. That's the circular economy. That's circular thinking. How do we think about using waste as a feedstock for future technologies? How do we contribute to the circularizing of resources, right? So we don't keep pulling resources from the earth. And finally, promoting sustainability in our supply chains and with our business partners. We have a lot of buying power as a company, and we believe that we can nudge our supply chain into also greening themselves and thinking more sustainable. So we've already had huge impacts in this area. And so that's a huge commitment we've made as well. So biodiversity, right? So the world is losing a lot of species, and that's not good for the planet. So we're taking a lot of effort into the space. In fact, my team has been looking at how do we measure, before we go into a new location to put something in, how do you know what's there to begin with? And then how do you, once you've built that, you haven't messed with that at the end? And so this is an area we call it eDNA, or environmental DNA. And it's, rather than going out and collecting all the species and trying to measure how many whales and how many dolphins and how many this were there, we can use DNA. I am a biologist. We can use DNA to tell exactly who's been there and what kind of levels they're at. And we can monitor that throughout the process, so we don't end up with invasive species. We don't end up with something that wasn't supposed to be there, or we didn't lose something entirely. And then the question is, like, if we do see that, how are we going to deal with that as we go? And that's still a work in progress. But at least now we're finding ways to measure this so we can hold ourselves accountable, which is important. So this is, you can read through these. This is all about that. But we've also made a huge partnership with a company called Fauna and Flora International, which is helping us stay honest to this particular sustainable way of doing it. And that's again important from a sustainability standpoint. That's not just us saying, I checked the box. We have external partners helping us validate whether or not we're actually doing this correctly. Natural climate solutions, again, that's a key tool, right? Trees, natural climate, ways to battle the problems we've created for ourselves is really, really important, right? You have to do this if we're going to hit the Paris goals. We do have a track record and capability. So again, I already talked about the forestry, the investment in those, planting more trees. We're in more than 10 countries now doing this, and we're building integrated partnerships to help us do this. And finally, supporting this market. I mean, this is going to be huge for the world. So how do we scale this? How do we promote it? And how do we leverage our own advocacy in governments around the world to say, look, this needs to be an accepted way to offset the emissions that we produce, all of us produce as part of living. And so that just brings us back. This is the sustainability frame. This took a lot of time to pull together. It's still a work in progress. I'm not going to tell you that BP's got this solved at all. It's difficult, right? But the key message, right, for BP, we weren't starting from scratch. So that was the good news. But we believe with the change in CEO, embracing a brand new purpose and ambition was the time to enhance the approach and add in a sustainability frame. And that's actually going to help us drive our strategy forward into those three pillars. But again, it comes down to we are committed to putting it at the heart of what we do. So you won't be able to get a project approved unless you've thought about how your project affects our sustainability aims now, and that's a requirement at this point for us. But to note that we are in action, right, and we're working on it together. So again, BP wasn't starting from scratch. So just to give you guys an idea of kind of the stuff that we do if you think from a sustainability standpoint, we have both onshore and offshore wind. In fact, we're growing our offshore wind in partnerships with companies like Equinor. We're making huge investments in there. These are not cheap. They're complicated. There are sustainability and biodiversity issues here. You're planting stuff in the water. Birds can get killed. How are you going to, deal with all this? So there's a lot that goes into a lot of this. And plus, when those blades are massive. I don't know if you guys have seen wind farms, but they're huge, right? They're composite materials. For those who do think about materials, it's a composite. You can't easily recycle these things. So we have to think about that in the future. Like, if you're going to build it, what do you do with it at its end of life, right? So one of the mantras of circular economy is design with the end in mind. So all of these technologies we are now building for the future and getting in, we do have to think about their sustainability platforms, right? And that is the recycling aspect of what do you do at end of life? Does it have a second use? So batteries, right, for EVs, could you use them secondarily to store energy, at least for a little while? But ultimately, what you have to be able to do is have batteries that are fully recyclable. We don't have that today. It's not easily done. So what kind of materials do you need for that? So we need to think about different things in the future. So Lightsource BP is our solar partnership with Lightsource, and we are the biggest, I don't know what the word is, putter down solar panels in Europe and growing in the US. So these are massive, massive solar farms. But again, I challenge Lightsource BP that I love solar panels, but they do have a finite life. I have 31 panels on the roof of my house. I do live in San Diego, California right now. What do they do at end of life? These are complicated materials fused together with precious metals inside, and we're going to have to be able to get all that material back and reuse it somehow. And there are companies working on it, and there's some that feel okay, but there's no system. So I don't know how many of you guys have an iPhone. I should send this to Siren, or maybe Siren, you can just write this down. But if you guys Google into YouTube, I will. So you put Apple and what's his name? Liam, Liam. So if you put Apple Liam into YouTube, you can watch a really cute little video. Apple has designed a robot. His name is Liam. He was the first, and he takes an iPhone apart in 8 minutes. And you'll see him. He takes it and puts everything in the right bin, and then they know what they're going to do with all those pieces, right? So they can completely recycle an iPhone, an iPad, because Apple made it and they designed the robot. When you finish that one, then go back and look at Apple Daisy. So try Daisy next. So Daisy is the more industrialized robot. She takes apart 200 iPhones in an hour. And so it's a little bit more industrial, and we can get through recycling all those iPhones that we all turn in to get the nice, latest, greatest next one, right? But that's the point. So companies are thinking about designing with the end in mind. That's a sustainability plan. That's a commitment to sustainability. And we need more like that. I need to see that for solar panels, right? And as a person who's part of the sustainability network in BP, I drive that question constantly. I love solar panels, but they've got a 25 to 30 year lifespan, right? So when I chose my panels, I wanted a company that was thinking about that already, even if there wasn't a plan. And the company I chose has got that plan, right? We also have BP Bunge. So BP Bunge is our mills in Brazil. We are the second largest producer of ethanol in Brazil. If you don't know, Brazil's almost energy, doesn't need anybody else's energy to come in because of the amount of ethanol they produce. Their cars can drive on 100% ethanol. They all have flex fuel vehicles. They can run on petrol, or they can run on 100% ethanol, or any blend in between. And they'll do it based on the price and the carbon intensity that's being sold that day. So it's quite something what we've done there. And the biopower part is when you take sugarcane and you leach out all the sugar, what's left is bagasse. It literally looks like mulch for your garden. And we actually burn that and create power that we sell to the grid. And so that provides power in Brazil as well. So it's thinking about all the components of any feedstock that we put in, that we're not leaving anything behind. And of course, the other big area we've gotten into in the US is biogas. So literally poop, poop from animals, manure, whatever you want to call it, from cows, from pigs, for example, and taking that away and putting that through anaerobic digesters to create biomethane gas. Biogas itself is methane plus CO2. So cleaning that up, taking out the biomethane, that can replace fossilized methane, which is better. And plus, if we don't leave it on the ground or go to landfill, we don't create methane that then escapes to the atmosphere. Again, a bad greenhouse gas. So that's where BP has started, and we continue to make investments in this. And again, one of the areas we're hugely growing right now is offshore wind, because that is a huge game changer. So for BP, this slide was just sort of indicating where we're pushing this, because these are the renewables and making more and more and more investments in this. These are sustainable. But I want to tell you guys one thing, right? So while I love renewables, and I am a renewable girl, I am a biofuels person. That is my background. Renewables are not necessarily, I wouldn't call them circular. I wouldn't call them anything like that. They are low carbon. But if you think about the infrastructure needed for those, I mean, let's go back, right? Look at the infrastructure there. Look at all the materials, the turbines themselves, those big poles, the turbine blades, the solar panels, all that steel. Now, steel is a poster child, and it's nice to recover and reuse steel. But if you think about all the materials in there, these are resources, right? And we have to, if you want to be sustainable, you need to develop low cost, low energy, low emission technologies that can recover and reuse or recycle these materials for the next set. Not easy for some of these materials. Again, those composite blades for the wind turbines is very difficult. One of the key, interesting companies I saw was in the Netherlands. They're grinding them up and using them as filler inside walls for soundproofing on freeways, motorways. So it's interesting what people are trying to come up with to do with these materials that are just really difficult to do something with. But this is a huge opportunity, like massive opportunity in my head, for what we can do to keep these low carbon technologies truly low carbon, and really sustainable for the future. Design them with the end in mind, but we already have stuff out there. We have to come up with answers for that. So anyways, this is just BP and how we think we're going to grow our renewables. Bioenergy is what we call it, and it's massive and will contribute to BP's bottom line in the future more and more and more. Hydrogen, another major area if you think about sustainability. And we're talking about green hydrogen. So I don't know if you guys understand all the colors. There's lots of colors of hydrogen. So black or brown hydrogen, not great, comes from fossil, coal, etc. We tend to talk about things like blue hydrogen. So blue hydrogen is where you bust methane, so CH4, into hydrogen plus CO2, but you have to bury the CO2, right? So that would be blue hydrogen. Turquoise hydrogen is, yeah, you bust it, but you don't necessarily, sequester it and do anything with it. Green hydrogen is the one that we're really going after. This is where you take water, you split water using electrolysis, you capture the hydrogen, oxygen just go away, and now you've got what we call clean hydrogen, but that's also powered by renewable energy. So that is green hydrogen. So I have a huge area of work in my team on the green hydrogen stuff. But BP's building this. This is a nascent area, right? So this is all new. It's complicated. Nothing works great yet. Lots of academic groups working on this, lots of companies working on this. It is part of the future of being able to be low carbon, net zero, and sustainable for the future, right? So that's just to give you an idea there, what BP is trying to do. Again, the solar panels, just to give an idea, we are global on the solar panels, mostly in Europe, but again, growing this area for everybody so that we have, more and more renewable, clean energy, right? So I just thought I'd bring in summary, right? That we call it reimagining our company. This is not the old BP. This is a new BP. We want to be trusted by society to deliver our sustainability goals, including net zero. We want to be valued by our shareholders because ultimately they pay our paychecks because they're investing and buying our shares. We also want to be motivating for staff, because motivated staff work harder. Guys, it's a massive opportunity for everyone, right? This is huge, whether you're a scientist, an economics major, you name it. It takes the village to make this all happen. Whether you're interested in the people side, the planet side, the net zero side, it's complicated and needs everyone to do their part. Again, just to bring this back for BP, right? We've partnered with cities. We've already announced. We've partnered with Houston. So Houston is in Texas, in the States. It's like the oil capital of the world. Like, everybody works there, works for Exxon or BP or one of the big Shell or companies like that. But they've partnered. They've committed to net zero. Think about that. A city in Texas is committed to net zero, and they partnered with us to help them get there. So these are huge. We've also partnered with Aberdeen in Scotland, and then companies. And just one example of a company is Microsoft. So we have partnered with Microsoft. They want to be net zero very quickly, right? They want to net zero all their operations, and then they want to go back in time and offset everything they did back then too, like from their inception. It's incredible what a company wants to do like that. We've also announced partnerships with Amazon and others, right? So everybody needs to come to the table and work together. And so it's just, how do you do that? And what's their policy for their sustainability goals? And how does that align with us? And that's how corporations are going to get to net zero, when they work with each other. Because Microsoft doesn't deliver energy. They deliver digital solutions, and that's great. And we need digital solutions. So how do we work together to do these things? We also operate a hell of a lot of retail sites in the world. So we have 19,000 retail sites, and actually that number's now bigger, in 21 countries, right? Think of the impact sustainable we have there. Think of all the little stores in there that people come into to buy stuff, and how we can make those sustainability goals different. So these are all things that we think about from a sustainability goal, and the impact we can have on the world, right? And how we can judge ourselves. So I'm just going to leave it there, because I think I way talked over. So sorry, Siren, I talk a lot. But it is about partnerships, right? It is about, it's not alone. Nobody's going to do this alone. Anybody's talking about, we're going to do this, but they have to partner. And that's what this slide tells you. It's about partnerships. It's about how you invest. We invest with universities, research institutions. We work with customers, OEMs that make the EV vehicles of the future. What do we need to get there, right? These are all ways that our company is embracing sustainability with everybody. You have to. And we perform while we transform. And so that's really the whole point. Remember, I gave you those numbers in the beginning. The purple numbers here on the slide say we've actually upped the ante. We're actually going to get to our goals even faster. So, 50% of our operations will now be net zero, instead of only maybe 30% by 2030. So we are upping the ante, and we're holding ourselves accountable, right? So that's the whole point of how we as a corporation have embraced this. It's not easy. It's hard. We can't do it alone, but we have to find ways to hold ourselves accountable and keep marching forward. We're a big ship. The ship has to stay on course. So that's where I am. Hopefully that helps you guys understand BP.
Yeah. A lot of insights from such a big corporation. Definitely massive task and massive goal to achieve. And there are a lot of questions from the students, but we don't have time. So I don't know how to do this. I can answer them by email, maybe. Maybe that's the way to go. Yeah. Okay, so maybe I'll just pick a couple of these that might, I think some of the questions you have answered it during your talk as you go along. So maybe I just ask a couple of things here. A lot of these sustainability, like you said, they will cost higher price. How would that actually affect people taking up the result of the sustainable approach? And then I wouldn't be buying eggs that are free range for like $3 more than I would get for $1, right? So most of the people won't do that. So what do you think about that?
That's an awesome question, and it's a dilemma. So I'm actually part of a group in the UK called One Bin, and this is a group of universities and companies that are trying to get together and say, how do we get everybody to do something together? And they've realized you can't answer anything without thinking not just about technology, but the behavioral side. And what's going to cause people to choose that, right? So I think for me, like, yeah, things are going to cost more. By the way, we're going to cost more anyways, but the green costs more. But if you put a carbon tax on everything, I mean, everything goes up, and you can buy the same thing for the same price, but this one's more sustainable. This one you might end up paying the same amount, but you're paying a carbon tax on it. I think the only way we're going to get there is with the carbon tax. But ultimately, until we have that, because we really don't have that fairly across the board, is you are making a conscious decision. It's behavioral. That's the human side, guys. I choose green. I drive an EV, right? I just, you choose.
But you're the VP of BP.
Well, I'm a BP person who drives an EV vehicle without a BP charging thing. I charge at home, right?
Okay.
You make a choice, right? We all make choices. Do you buy bottled water, or do you filter it yourself? And sustainability tells you filter it yourself, right? Buy one filter lots of water, than buying those plastic bottles over and over and over again, right? You guys carry around your own water bottles? I do. I have my little one at my desk, right? I don't buy bottled water because I hate the plastic. And now, although clear PET is very mechanically recyclable, I just don't want to do it. But people will pay for it because it's convenient.
Yeah. Price of
Make
convenience.
a choice. You guys, you make a choice, right? Everybody gets a choice.
Yeah. I have one more question, but I think it's very interesting to answer here. I mean, BP can move things around because you have a lot of capital. And one thing that this question is, like, a lot of companies may not have the resources BP has. And what would the recommended strategy for smaller research teams, for example, or smaller companies to identify areas at which would have high carbon impact or reduce their carbon impact?
Look, the reality is, I try to say in the beginning, right? Don't be afraid to start small. Every little step helps. It's a dimmer switch, guys. So a small company can make inroads and slowly gain. They find they get more market share. They grow the ability to do it. I mean, it's a tough call, but you can't not do it. We call it freedom to operate, FTO, right? So when you're trying to do something, there's a freedom to operate for any company, whether I'm a big company like BP or a little startup company somewhere else. But there's a social license to operate as well, right? So you have to think about Gen Z. Gen Z is really driving a lot of choices right now. I love it. I've got a daughter who's Gen Z and very strongly a Gen Zer, right? People will vote with their pocketbooks. So if you do the right thing, you probably drive your market share. How do you market it, right? You may cost more. You may not have as much money to invest, but do what you can. Don't not do it because you can't do it all. You have to start somewhere. I just keep driving it. You have to keep driving forward and look for investment. There are venture groups, guys. There are lots of venture groups that are investing in companies that want to do more sustainability. And if the market plan is there and everything is there, you'll find the investment. There's plenty of it. We have a ventures arm. I help our ventures group find technologies and companies to invest in that help our strategy, right? We have lots of investment in small companies, and that's what's going to drive this. So there is money out there if you got a small company idea, right? Innovations. Well, it's what's going to take, right? We don't have all the answers, guys. We're so far from having all the answers, right? So.
Okay, Kristy, I just want to ask one more question. We have to be circular. We have to bring the carbon back down, because otherwise we have been mining everything out from the earth, and that's our only natural capital.
There's too much carbon up there. We have to bring it. Yeah.
So how so you really think that we should bring it back down from the air, from everywhere we can get back into the earth, or is it
what we call DAC, right? Direct air capture, is just it's too expensive right now, right? So how are you going to pull it? Well, one, we got to stop putting it in the air, right? That's number one. So you can't put more in the air, right? We have to grab it back. We have to go for carbon negative, right? So biogas, for example, can be it's got a negative CI, negative carbon intensity value. You got to look for more and more of these. We need to plant more stuff, because that is one way, natural climate solutions, right? Plant trees, etc. But we can't just keep putting carbon out there. We have to do that. But then at the same time, we do have to find ways to do the direct air capture to pull the stuff back from the atmosphere. But right now, the cheapest thing we're kind of going to probably do is just stop putting it in the air. We have to look for ways like, so I'm a biofuel girl, right? So I like fermentation, love it. Those of you who have ever brewed beer, wine, I love it. But off the top of that fermenter is coming pure CO2 for the most part. It's quite pure. I'm trying to get our biofuels, BP Bunge. We are the second largest producer of biofuels. Biofuels are negative, right? Think about it. I grow sugar cane. I cut it down. I bring it in. I ferment it. I make ethanol. I then use ethanol when I combust that. It makes CO2. But guess what? I grew more sugar cane. Awesome. I'm either negative or I'm at least neutral. What if I trap the CO2 on the top of that fermenter, right? And I sequester that. I bury it or I put it into something else that sequesters the carbon into a more solid state. I've now made it even more negative, right? We have to think of even those little things that will help us move the dial downwards, right? But there's too much carbon in the atmosphere right now. So for those of you, the other thing I thought about that maybe you guys want to look at is Stockholm Resilience Center there, or you can just Google it. It's called Planetary Boundaries. And that's really fascinating. And there's a TED Talk, if you guys like TED Talks. There's a woman named Kate, so Kate Raworth, Raworth. So she talks about donut economics. She's a fascinating speaker. It's a TED Talk, so it's short and cute and she's a great speaker who talks about planetary boundaries, how we've crossed where we have to live in a donut. You'll understand when you watch the TED Talk. This is where it drives as well. It's something else to consider. For those who aren't just the techies who might be more into economics and things like that, there's that to consider as well. How do we do that? How do we get there? But we have to change, guys. We can't keep doing what we've been doing, right? So I'm a biologist who works for BP, right? I have more influence on the boat than off. So I'm staying on the boat to get them to do the right thing, right? So it's awesome. Yeah. But you guys can all do your parts too.
Okay. Well, thanks so much, Kristy. That was really awesome, insightful, informative session. I really learned a lot about what BP is doing. It's definitely one of the biggest oil producers in the world. And we're actually not. Actually, to be honest with you, we're pretty small compared to an Exxon and a Shell. I see.
But
okay.
We're still massive if you think about it, right? So, we can make a dent in the carbon footprint. But I'll offer it, Sharon, if you want to send me the questions, I can try to answer somebody.
Yeah, so that was what I would do. I will send you the questions. If maybe it's easier for you to record your answers for each one of them. Then you don't have to type it in.
I find it type too.
Okay.
I'm tired of listening to me now.
All right, we'll leave it up to you. But thank you so much, Kristy. That was really nice.
By the way, guys, I am on LinkedIn. If any of you are on LinkedIn, happy to link in. Just tell me you're in this course, and I'll happy to chat. So
yeah.
It's about networking, partnership.
Yes. Okay.
Okay.
Well, we hope to see you again next semester, Kristy.
Yep.
Take care.